It is Thursday, August 27, 2026, coming to you from America's beautiful North Coast. From the shores of Lake Superior, this is the American Descent. I'm your host, Sam Martin.
And I'm Jen Schultz.
Before we dive in, please subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, leave a comment. It all helps as we begin our journey here on YouTube. If you're listening to a podcast, please leave a 5-star review. Thank you ever so much. On today's show, an interview with Patrick Coolican, founding editor of the Minnesota Reformer, an independent online news organization that he founded in January 2020. In the past, he's worked at the Seattle Times, Las Vegas Sun, and Minnesota Star Tribune. Last year, he was named Minnesota Journalist of the Year. In the news, ICE agent Christian Castro was released from Texas jail today, despite his outstanding arrest warrant in Minnesota. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison says he will continue to seek Castro's arrest and extradition to Minnesota after yesterday a judge ruled against Minnesota's suit aiming to prevent Castro from being released while the extradition was being litigated. Now, Castro could simply be rearrested by Texas authorities, but there is concern that he will flee to Mexico, potentially even with the help of the state's governor. A Rio Grande school district, where school has already been in session for 2 weeks, has had to cancel classes due to a rapid spread of the COVID-19 virus. Also in health news, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said this week that a deadly measles outbreak in Pennsylvania should be blamed on a decline in the measles vaccine rates caused by, get this, Joe Biden. Awfully rich coming from the nation's most prominent anti-vaccine activist. Ukrainian drones struck a major Russian oil refinery, the 4th largest in Russia and the 2nd largest gasoline producer. This caused an immediate global spike in diesel prices around the globe, including a 20-cent per gallon jump here in the United States. This, combined with the disastrous war in Iran, continues to make life more expensive for everyone. Current diesel prices are $2 a gallon higher today than they were this time last year. In elections, polls continue to surprise. Texas Southern University polling shows 3 heavily Trump-leaning congressional districts in South Texas swinging massively in favor of Democrats, not just in the congressional races, which the Republicans had redrawn, expecting electoral pickups of 2 seats and a hold in another, but also in the governor's race, where Democrat Gina Hinojosa holds modest leads in all 3 districts, and the Senate race, where James Tallarico holds quite significant leads in all 3 districts. If this is how things are going in districts Republicans redrew specifically to give themselves an advantage, we may yet see a blue wave finally claim Texas. In a separate statewide poll, nonpartisan pollster Texas Public Opinion Research shows Tallarico leading Paxton by 6 points, while incumbent GOP Governor Greg Abbott leads Gina Hinojosa by 7, with no candidate polling over the coveted 50%. Meanwhile, polling in Wisconsin is showing a tight race for governor. Marquette, considered the gold standard of polling in the state of Wisconsin, found Democrat David Crowley ahead of Tom Tiffany by 5 points with likely voters, but a dead tie with all registered voters included. In another shock of a poll, Impact Research polled in the Senate race in South Carolina. This is an internal poll on behalf of the Democrat in the race, Annie Andrews, now that the GOP has chosen Darlene Graham as their candidate. This internal poll, released by Andrews, it has to qualify as shocking. It shows a tie at 41% after the initial ask, and then the pollster followed up by giving information from the Andrews campaign, which put her ahead 5 points. There remain 13% undecided in both numbers, so Democrats probably shouldn't get their hopes up. That 13% is still very likely to swing toward the GOP. Lastly, what appeared to be a coordinated Democratic party attack on Twitch streamer Hassan Piker now appears to be a request by AIPAC. The group of elected Democrats who have weighed in with messages condemning the Twitch streamer is made up exclusively of Democrats who have received a combined total of $14.3 million in spending by AIPAC and its allies, according to the organization Track AIPAC. The move appears to be calculated to harm the candidacy of Democratic Senate nominee Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan. His GOP opponent, Mike Rogers, meanwhile, attended four AIPAC-hosted fundraisers over 2 days in Los Angeles earlier this week, according to the New York Times. While Democrats seem powerless to band together to attack the Trump administration or his allies, their coordinated smear campaign of a prominent leftist is as telling as it is depressing. They should probably just say nothing, but it appears their donors don't want that. And now, on to our interview. Unless, Jen, you want to chime in.
No, I know that you mentioned yesterday Neera Tanden, the head of the Center for American Progress. Well, Trump is suing her because the center put out a really good research article that maybe we can talk about next week about crime rates where there is a big presence of National Guard members. And he was not happy with the results and is now suing them over this research publication that they found, low crime rates, but there's no evidence that the National Guard is making an impact. But we can talk about that next week. But it is the first day of the fair, so I hope people are enjoying it and eating a lot of the great food. But we have a really good interview with Patrick Coolican that I hope people listen to and then go start reading the Minnesota Reformer.
Absolutely. Let's turn it over to our interview of Patrick Coolican, and we'll see you next week. And joining us now is Patrick Coolican, founding editor of the Minnesota Reformer, an independent online news organization that was founded in January 2020. In the past, Patrick has worked at the Seattle Times, Las Vegas Sun, and the Minnesota Star Tribune. Last year, he was named Minnesota Journalist of the Year. Patrick, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Good to be here.
So I got to say, founding a news organization in January 2020, right before one of the biggest news events of all of our lifetimes, when people's attention was extremely focused on the news for months and months and months, that's quite extraordinary. Talk to us about that experience.
Yeah, it was either serendipitous or horrible. I remember late January, we were only a few weeks old, and I said, I feel like we need to get ready for this coronavirus that's coming. And that was one of my rare forecasts that was correct. And then, of course, it just continued with George Floyd murder and the aftermath of that. And then there was the trial, and the election of 22 turned out to be fascinating because it was a trifecta. There was Roe v. Wade was overturned, and then we had this Democratic trifecta. It was very productive. And then right into Tim Walz's vice presidential run. And then sadly, Melissa Hortman's murder. We were covering the breakdown, the looting of our social safety net in Minnesota, and then we go into Operation Metro Surge. So it's kind of feels like, and actually a year ago today was the Annunciation church shooting. So it has been an incredible run and exhausting, but also has given me a chance to do work that I didn't really know that I was capable of myself, and also helping other people, collaborating, because I'm a tiny part of it.
What is it like? Tell our audience a little bit about the Minnesota Reformer first, Patrick.
Yeah, so there was a group of our founders and funders were concerned. This is roughly 10 years ago, a little less, about um, the emptying out of capital bureaus around the country. So, it would have been typical in, let's say, Des Moines, Iowa, for there to be, maybe a dozen reporters between TV and print and AP, the Associated Press. But the collapse of newspapers, regional newspapers, and radio stations had really decimated state politics and policy coverage. And the problem with that is that the most important decisions in a person's life, for the most that government makes, are really at the legislature for the most part, to some degree at the city hall. So all this action around and media around Congress and Washington and New York, but really it's your legislature that sets your education funding and your road funding and determines whether or not um, gambling or marijuana is going to be legal and all that kind of stuff. And so the lack of coverage, and we know what happens when there's a lack of coverage. You get more corruption, you get worse governance. And so they were committed to kind of trying to fill that hole. We were I think the 12th state. So, and now our umbrella nonprofit's called States Newsroom. We're now in 39 states. We generally have, in most places, it's 3 reporters and an editor. In our case, it's 4 reporters and an editor. We also were lucky to get a grant, and we have a photographer. What I would say about Minnesota's media ecosystem is we still have a robust coverage of politics and policy. With the Star Tribune is still in decent shape, which is really rare. NPR is very well resourced. You've got MinPost and Sahan, the TV station. The TV reporters are excellent here on politics and policy because the state capital is in the big metro. So what we had to do was determine, we don't just want to just go to a press conference and tell people what was said, because there was tons of that already. So we needed to do, thankfully this coincided with my interest, which was what we call in the trade enterprise reporting. This is stories that you're not going to get elsewhere. It's investigative. It might be an analytical angle that other people don't have. It might be some kind of storytelling. And my other thing was I wanted reporting that was less deferential and more skeptical, more adversarial, more confrontational, of people in power, both parties, but also the kind of, there's a power elite in Minnesota that I thought needed more scrutiny. And so that's what we've been trying to do. I think I think we've been pretty successful. The audience has really reacted to it in terms of audience growth, and then of course we're supported by a lot of grassroots donors, and they've been incredibly generous as well.
Because the Minnesota Reformer is a nonprofit, so you accept donations. You're the donor that helped kick this off. Is that donor involved in any way with what you do every day?
Not at all.
Okay.
He's a Swiss billionaire, and he's an octogenarian, and he has no interest in Minnesota per se. I do have someone who kind of supervises. He supervises 8 or 10 states in the network. So I talk to him for 30 minutes every week, and they tell them what we're doing. He offers feedback, but generally speaking, it's a level of autonomy I've never really had, because whenever you work if you work at a large organization, there's just, like all bureaucracies, there's so many veto points. And then, there's also the issue of, I've worked at places where, the publisher's friend and the advertisers and everything else. And we're lucky that, for the most part, the only thing is don't get sued, and don't embarrass us.
Yeah, but it's free. It's online. And if you have access to the internet or through a library, you can go read every article, not firewall.
Yeah, you're providing the details I should have.
It's okay. But can you tell us, like, if you can't tell us, like, number of the readership you have, maybe can you tell us about the growth from when you started in 2020?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you that, we started with 650 newsletter subscribers. These were people who kind of knew of me from the Star Tribune, and now we're at, 10 or 12,000. We had, I think 6 million page views last year. Because of Google's the way they're this collapse of their search engine. It's difficult, but we're really maintaining that level because the loyalty. I mean, we have people in Minnesota are so civically engaged and literate that they and they're loyal too. So um, we've had pretty incredible growth. The other thing is that we're free to republish. I don't think people, that's something I'd like to tell everyone. Um, so there's dozens of newspapers now that are republishing our work weekly. And so people all over the state who were not getting any politics or policy coverage, like let's say the St. Cloud Times. It's a Gannett-owned newspaper. I think at one point I think they were down to one journalist in their newsroom. I don't know if they're still there, but the point is they're not able to cover events at the Capitol. And so for the people in the St. Cloud region who have important decisions to make in a democratic and self-governing democracy, that where are they going to get their information? Well, it was social media or whatever. And so now the St. Cloud Times is publishing our stories about the complicated issues that they need information on. So, we have a good story coming on Medicaid on Monday, and I just know that they would have no access to that except for us. And so it's very gratifying for me to see I get a weekly report of all the other places that are using our work.
I know I see articles in the labor world, which is distributed to union members in Northeast Minnesota. So they are definitely republishing articles from the Minnesota Reformer. But that is great because a lot of local papers, very local, have closed. And we need to, that's vital to I think, our health of our democracy. But full disclosure, I contribute articles to the Minnesota Reformer, not as frequently as I would like to, but also a donor. So, if you haven't checked it out, check it out and also think about donating.
Appreciate it.
Yes, Jen's very good at this, getting the word out. But you mentioned other news organizations, like you mentioned Gwinnett in Duluth, where Jen and I are located. There's the local paper here is owned by Forum Communications, which is another gigantic megalith, and it seems like more and more and more local news, and even the news stations you mentioned in the metro area. I mean, they're all being consolidated into fewer hands, and this leads to a potential skew in reporting, as of course there are corporate owners of these that have their own goals and mechanisms, and I don't know kind of what separations and how robust they are between the corporate desires of the owners and the journalism that actually takes place. So independent media is obviously very important. What do you see going on kind of in media more broadly when we're talking about that kind of that consolidation of media organizations into fewer and fewer hands? And then at the same time, this proliferation of organizations, not just like yours, but there are other smaller outlets that are relying purely on subscribers and subscriptions and donors, of course, that are hiring real journalists, going out doing real like investigative reporting and that kind of stuff. What's kind of the dynamic that you're noticing in that kind of interplay between the two?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of trends that you kind of touched on. Like, let's just start with newspapers. They forever usually had a monopoly in their market on print advertising, which was a very important way to reach people. I mean, if you grew up in the era after newspapers, it doesn't occur to you that before Craigslist, there was a classified ad. If you wanted to sell your truck, you would pay the newspaper $50 a week or whatever to have an ad in the paper. That obviously all went away. And then at the same time, print advertising, which is far more expensive than digital advertising, has also, of course, declined. And so that's the main cause of. And then the other one is that people are just getting their news a different way. I think there's some discussion lately around the fact that we're becoming a post-literate society, which is super dangerous to me. And so people are getting their news on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram. So again, bad for newspapers. So that's happening. Some newspapers are just closing. Others are being bought up, as you said. And those large consolidated corporations, they have they're very sensitive to the Trump administration, which has shown itself very willing to wield whatever levers it has at its disposal. And I mean, it's a slightly different situation because it's the Washington Post. It's not a newspaper corporation per se, but the owner, Jeff Bezos, has a lot of issues before the United States government. And he essentially just bent the knee to Trump. The America's second most important newspaper is now sort of under the I mean, it's still doing some good work there, but they're sort of under the thumb of Trump. So luckily, a lot of people are saying, well, this is an untenable situation. And so, we've reached, I mean, there's something almost like Tocquevillian about it, where it's like, okay, we need to replace this missing public good. And by the way, I mean, when newspapers had that monopoly, the good thing is that there was a sort of culture of noblesse oblige that had developed. It's a fairly recent phenomenon, like 20th century. And, instead of robber barons using newspapers to like attack other robber barons or start wars, they had this belief that it was important to have an objective, unbiased press, and they created these firewalls between advertising and journalism. I mean, ostensibly, and you can say what you want about whether that was naive and so forth. So now you get all these people coming in saying, "Okay, we got to replace this with something," and they've replaced it with philanthropy, and that's where something like our organization comes in. Then you've got a lot of just plucky entrepreneurs. I mean, like there's when City Pages, was it City Paper? I can't remember. The Twin Cities Alternative
City
Weekly shut
Pages,
down.
yep.
City Pages, which had I mean, just an amazing legacy. The Star Tribune bought it, shut it down. Those folks got together and created their own publication called Racket, and they're a bit of worker-owned publication, small publication. They do some good stuff. It's mostly like features and arts, but they certainly have a political. They do political journalism too and commentary. And so you're seeing that. I think there's a guy in Duluth, the Duluth Monitor, right? He's really done. I was at a banquet where he won an award or two. So you're seeing that everywhere. You're seeing like in Eden Prairie, some folks got together and started something. So you're seeing a lot of like it's heartening to see this American ingenuity and civic commitment replace the big newspapers. And so that feels like the future. And then the other trend here is that basically everybody can be a publisher, for better or worse.
That's right.
And so Substack and all this stuff. I mean, with that, and of course, there's this sort of micro takes on Twitter and everywhere else. This is not journalism, though. It's opinion for the most part. I mean, there's reporters working on Substack, so to be clear, but how much more opinion do we need? And the real problem, I think, is that we don't have a shared set of facts, and it's very easy and the algorithm will help you do this. Get yourself in a silo, and you're only seeing information that confirms your worldview, which I think is dangerous. And So that's concerning to me. And I don't know what to do about that. That's sort of like above my pay grade. But it's just heartening to see, okay, wow, this is terrible that we're losing journalists and journalism, but enough people realize how dangerous that is, that the gap is being filled, at least in some situations.
Right. And you mentioned, anyone can publish. I mean, that's essentially what we're doing here. And, a lot of people get their news from people whose primary position is as opinion havers and givers. And there's different levels of value to that, but I would like to think that Jen and I, neither of us are journalists, but there's people like us who rely on finding good journalism and good journalists and really need news organizations broadly to thrive in order to do what we're doing well. And then, of course, there's people just spout off whatever the hell they want to spout off, regardless of any facts or anything else. So it's really, really important that you know that organizations like yours, and even the big old standards, like you mentioned, Washington Post ownership and Jeff Bezos and the dangers of that kind of ownership of a news organization. And they fired a hell of a lot of really good reporters, but they still have a hell of a lot of really good reporters who, they're not essentially bought off by Trump or Jeff Bezos or anything. They're trying to continue doing good work and just avoid getting fired. So and the same can be said for reporters at all kinds of these old institutions. Um, and we're relying on all of it. I mean, even other reporters rely on other reporters to, like, oh, that's a good idea, or that's something you're reporting on a national level. There might be something part of that in Minnesota that I can go find, or that I can hunt down, and things like that. So it's an ecosystem that really relies on the whole ecosystem being healthy. And that's what I'm really concerned about is the health of that ecosystem. And it seems like, the Minnesota Reporter and other organizations similar to that are, at least for now, ensuring that a good chunk of that ecosystem is still healthy. And I guess that's my main concern, is that part of it, actual reporters going and getting actual stories that otherwise wouldn't be gotten,
Yeah,
continues
I
to
mean,
happen.
I think there's like half as many journalists as there were 15 or 20 years ago, and probably commensurate increased number in PR people. And so, if half as many, that's just half as many stories. Now, granted, there was a lot of duplication, and maybe a lot of those people shouldn't have been journalists, but you do need people who can go find facts, especially when they're not being handed out on. I'm not talking about like writing up a press release. I'm talking about, yesterday we published a story um, by a reporter who did a lot of public records requests, got a lot of correspondence from Minneapolis schools, and discovered that they had made a significant accounting error, had not told the public. And so that's important information for the Minneapolis, for voters who are making choices about the school board, and for parents, obviously, and teachers. And that could never. I mean, they were never going to present that information to us. That was not ever going to be known until we demanded the information. And by the way, that required an attorney, because they were very resistant to turning over. So that's another issue is, do news organizations have the resources to fight when need be, for public records, public access, open meetings? And I knew right away that was worth spending on, because to have a school district fighting us on public records immediately is a red flag. And so, back to your point, you need people who can go out and extract information. And it's a pretty rare skill. And it was when we had X number of journalists, there was if there was some percentage of those who could do that, there's far fewer now.
So my son is a senior, Patrick, and he is a very strong writer, really smart, loves to read. And I'm thinking, oh, you would probably be a really good investigative journalist. But is that a good career choice in this age of AI? I mean, will he be able to pay the bills if he wanted to do journalism?
What I tell people is that, because I get this, I have a fair number of young people every couple of months. They want to talk or meet. And I say, if you're passionate about it, really passionate about it, you're willing to work for substandard wages, especially like early on, live in the middle of nowhere, maybe, or live with 7 roommates in Washington, D.C. You can do it. But it's harder than when I was coming up because there was, there was more newspapers in those days. And I mean, we do have some growth in nonprofit, but it doesn't change the fact that there's, again, half as many journalists as there were. And then it just feels like when I think about the people who work for me, who applied for jobs with me, like I had an opening last year and I had like 80 resumes. I had 10 really good candidates. I had 5 finalists. I don't want to throw around like fancy colleges, but like I was choosing between people from very fancy colleges. Not that that's how I choose. I just mean that it's like, these are really like ambitious, talented people. So there's that, but go for it. It's kind of like, you want to make it in Hollywood, like give it a shot. Go, spend, if you really love it, you're passionate about it. If you're not, if it feels like, oh, maybe I want to do this, like, I would. And the other thing is like, have a backup. I would never major in journalism. I think there's people who would get mad at me for saying that, but like, I think you're better off because we're also like in that environment, you're better off specializing in something like, so if you're bilingual, if you can really work a spreadsheet, if you have a really strong background in economics or science, that is going to get you farther than, to me, I think. I don't have a journalism degree, so maybe that's my bias.
And they've ended that major at a lot of universities, journalism. So I think
they
it's becoming
should,
communication. But like I said, he likes chemistry. I'm like, go do the sciences, and you can cover this science area in journalism.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm at so you could start at there's well-known trade magazines. But if you're deep into the science and like you have a better shot at going, and winding up the Wall Street Journal and covering 3M or whatever. So it can be done, but it is challenging. It is challenging these days.
Yeah, Patrick, when you talk about, investigative journalism and going out and getting the story and maybe even having to bring lawyers into the mix, it's not just challenging, it's also requires a pretty, stiff backbone and a willingness to kind of like get yelled at and, risk yourself. You said earlier, the mandate coming from the top was basically don't get sued. Well, news organizations get sued. And they do have to defend themselves. And importantly, they have to defend the people that write for them, because sometimes there's, I don't know, a vindictive man in the White House and you do a story on something that he doesn't want you doing a story about, and he's incredibly litigious. So, people have to have quite a spine to do that work, don't they?
It is scary. And when they say don't get sued, it's like it's like do stories that are confrontational, but like make sure they're vetted, you know. But it doesn't matter because especially since the Gawker lawsuit, which was financed by Peter Thiel
That's right.
and destroyed Gawker, like that's like a new way to, if you don't like a publication, you find a rich sponsor and you just go after them with you have this incredible amount of money. But yeah, I distinctly recall getting our first sort of threat letter on a Friday afternoon. And I mean, it was scary and debilitating. And of course we were correct and we had done the work. And again, that's where like, it was worth it for us to send back our own sort of tough letter, because we have a good statute, a SLAPP statute here. So frivolous lawsuits can be met with force. But yeah, we've gotten a couple of those, and that's sort of always something to be concerned about. I mean, I think we're flying under the radar as an organization because we cover state capitals, but like, this administration is clearly ready to make war on civil society groups. They're out there surveilling labor unions and progressive
in Minnesota,
in
like all
Minnesota.
kinds of
Yes,
groups.
and this is news of the last couple of weeks. So, why wouldn't we? They've done this with Washington Post reporters as well. Like, why do we not? We just have to assume that they could be coming for us too, and so we have to be very careful about nonprofit rules and everything else, and not making it easy for them, if that makes sense. But yeah, you have to be thick-skinned, and then the other thing is like it would just never happen like 20 years ago. Generally speaking, if somebody had a problem with the story, they would like call you. Maybe they would call the editor. Now they're out there on Twitter trashing you, doxing you, whatever. It's and it's especially, I think, important for young women who are in the profession, who face harassment. Like, we don't have our actual physical address is nowhere to be found. Where our nonprofit pays for a service for us that protects our privacy online. So these are all kinds of things that I think, 20, 30 years ago were just not part of the trade. And now they very much are front and center.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about like, obviously public policy affects your livelihood and affects how you run a news organization. But you also cover public policy. So what, news writers can just as easily be news stories in and of themselves, just by, kind of crazy circumstances and stuff like this. But when you're covering public policy, obviously you want to be as, even-handed and as, as objective as you can, just covering what it is and what it does and all that kind of stuff. But also there's the fact that, there are people around the country, and certainly people in Minnesota as well, who want to pass laws that are going to greatly affect, how news is made and how news can be covered, and how your business is run. How do you balance, covering it, but also being affected by it and having a stake in, because everybody has a stake in government. Sometimes I watch, interviews on CNN, and I'm just gobsmacked by the fact that a guest is just saying utter nonsense and crazy stuff. And it's like, the interviewer, I'm always screaming, like, you live in this country too. Like, could you talk about that? I mean, how do journalists deal with that?
Well, yeah, I think your question, I think, there's a couple different lanes there in your question. I mean, one is there's this really concerted effort to attack the free press, and so how do we cover that? I think that there's a tradition of, well, we're not part of the story, and we want to keep at arm's length from our impact. So like, someone might attack a newspaper, and traditionally, like, you wouldn't respond. And I mean, to me, I never really understood this. And I think, we don't, I mean, we generally, like, a lot of times it's not worth it to engage. But why would we fight with one hand but tied behind our back and allow people to defame us and erode our credibility and all the stuff that they're trying to do? I mean, there's this long-standing 50-year effort to destroy neutral or impartial institutions. The free press, universities, government agencies. Now, to some degree, those of us who work in these spaces we probably could have done better. But it is a concerted effort. So when I see, like, oh, nobody trusts the media anymore, well, it's like, okay, nobody would trust the auto industry if there was like this very well-funded effort to talk about how cars are so dangerous, or airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to push back on that. And the other thing is, why we would expect the bearer of bad news to be a popular person in in the community. I mean, we often are delivering bad news, and that's sort of a different subject. But as far as allowing people to spew nonsense, that's another. I mean, that's something that's eroded our credibility. We just like, it became a communication strategy that, like, let's say, like, the most embarrassing thing, like, let's say the Trump, remember when he got caught on tape, essentially confessing to sexual assault, grab him by the blank. Yep. Well, I think there would be a time when everyone would have said, Republicans would have said, well, that's deplorable, and and I have nothing, or not say no comment. Instead, like, it's like, well, let's come up with a line. So they decided it was locker room talk, and everybody goes around saying it's locker room talk. So it's like, no matter how bad the situation is, you come up with a line, and then everybody says that line, and then in a more substantive way, it could be, whatever they're saying about the Iran war, about how it's going great, even though everybody knows it's going terribly. It's been a strategic disaster. But you have all these big mainstream media companies. They have it as part of their ethos that they have to present the side of people who are spewing, even if they're spewing nonsense. We know they're nonsense. So I always hated that when I worked at an organization, mainstream organizations, that we just gave people the space to spout nonsense. And so that's something I think it's important that we are good faith in our news gathering, give people a chance to talk, if we're making an allegation about somebody. But if somebody tells us something that's just nonsensical, we need to call it out. And I hope that we do that. When we don't do that, it's really glaring, I think, and the readers usually call us out on it.
It's more common for people not to do that now in mainstream media, I think. But You mentioned a post-literate society, and I think on this podcast I've plugged Rose Horowitz's article in The Atlantic about the end of reading. And, I'm around college students a lot, and I notice that they don't read very much. You also see like the number of minutes it will take to complete a newspaper article now. I see that a lot, even in the New York Times. So people and a lot of my teenagers, the college students I'm around every day, they get their news from social media. Some people get their news from, or I don't know, listen to Joe Rogan and they think that's news. But I was teaching a summer class and I told them they had to go find newspaper articles in news articles. And literally more than half the class did not come back with the newspaper article. Like, did they not know what a newspaper is? I was thinking, I have to give them more information, more explanation of what I mean by a newspaper article, which to me is kind of sad, but it's kind of a revelation. So what is the Minnesota Reformer doing now that a lot of people get their news from video content? The New York Times is doing a lot more video content, or interviews instead of requiring people to read something. Is the Minnesota Reformer going to try to go into more video content?
Yeah, we do want to reach people, meet them where they're at, as we say. And so that was part of our grant proposal. So our photographer also does video work, and we post to Instagram and TikTok. It's better than nothing. But I'm with you. This has been, it's a very Marshall McLuhan discussion about, there've been, you mentioned the Atlantic article, and she talks about these fears from the rise of television. And of course, now I think it seems to be much worse. There's something much worse about short video than there was about watching Walter Cronkite. And however bad American politics had become by the 1980s, this still seems something worse because your brain processes the information differently when you're getting it in a 12-second clip as opposed to reading something. I don't know. I'm not a neuroscientist, but that seems self-evident to me.
Well, to tie this back into the, what we were just talking about is that, part of it, there's a loss of literacy, and I would say there's a separate loss of news literacy. Like when you are exposed to news and someone providing news, how do you evaluate what you're hearing? I make no bones about where I sit politically and what my beliefs are. So I feel like when I talk about a news event or when I talk about something in the news, I'm coming at it honestly from a perspective of, hey, these are the set of beliefs that I come at all news stories from. And I feel like there are a lot of journalists out there that I really, really respect who have a clear, for instance, when I read articles about what's going on in the Middle East, it's usually from journalists who are very clear about how they view what's going on in Palestine. They're very clear about where they stand on that. And so it allows me to just be like, okay, so now that I know that, now I understand what I'm reading and what I'm getting at. So there's a news literacy aspect. How do you even know if what you're reading has any credibility at all based on the source it's coming from? But when people see, we were talking about when people see CNN or news, New York Times op-ed piece where someone is just straight up spouting falsehood after falsehood after falsehood, and the editorial board at the paper or the host on CNN is doing nothing about it. They're saying nothing. It lowers credibility in traditional news sources, which I feel like probably redounds to the credibility of all news sources, which is why people feel like, well, I could get crappy news from there, or I could just, get the 10-second version on Twitter from my favorite, World of Warcraft player or whatever. So it's, we're in quite a state. And I mentioned that because the number one political streamer in the United States became famous as a World of Warcraft player. And now he's, one of the most like deeply Trump aligned, very scary guy who just all he does is talk politics from the most conservative standpoint possible and just spews whatever the hell pops into his head. And he has no news literacy whatsoever. It's very clear. His name is Asmongold, if you want to look him up. But the point is we just don't. It is a very strange person. It's a very strange story. And he recently got kicked off of Twitch for 2 weeks for calling for the death of immigrant children. He just outright said, please kill immigrant children in the United States. Or specifically, he was reacting to the story that was coming out of Morocco at the time, where people were trying to get into that Spanish city in Morocco. He's like, go ahead and kill the men, women, and children for all I care. And got just for 2 weeks he was off of Twitch and he's back. But the point is like people have so little trust because I mean, this is me editorializing, because they see the poor job that these hosts are doing in confronting the crap that keeps getting spewed all over our channels, that it makes all crap being spewed anywhere just seem just as credible as anything else. And that's my worry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's like a failure of like, the CNN host who doesn't challenge the guests. And by the way, TV's a challenging medium. Like, if you've ever been on TV, like it goes by so fast, and like those people who make it look good, natural, are like, it's incredible skill. I always feel like such an idiot after I've gotten off a TV hit. But I think that's the reason people are watching. What was the guy's name? On Twitch,
Asmongold.
Yeah,
Asmongold. Yeah.
He's probably more entertaining. And he's more interesting, more compelling. And, the other scary thing is that, like, liberal, even like, let's just say small L liberals, like, we're just not competing in those spaces, because why would I do that? Like, I have my mental health to worry about. And that's where you get like this, we need a liberal Joe Rogan or whatever. And it's like, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. But I remember the thing about talk radio, when talk radio in the 90s became this powerful political medium.
Right.
And it was like, well, we need a liberal, Rush Limbaugh. It was like, well, yeah, but liberals, like, I don't know, like, they like to read books and like pet their cat. They don't want to listen to some raving, even if it's left leaning, person on radio for 3 hours or whatever it was, So, so there is this challenge of different mediums, but your point about media literacy is absolutely correct. I mean, it's astounding the people who just, it's like, oh, well, I saw it on Facebook, and then they have no, I don't know, there's no, to me, like, if sort of non-political or non-media friends will send me something and it's conspiracy theory and it's like wrong or whatever, I'm always like astounded. It's like, you didn't check it out before you just sent it out in the world. But people don't have that sense of like embarrassment or whatever, that they've been, they just sort of like polluted the information atmosphere like I do. Like, when I make an error, it's mortifying.
Right. But now it's AI slop, right? Now people are sending stories. And good, well-meaning people get fooled all the time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I used to, I joked about there was Sharon Angle was a far right. She was like Trump before Trump, the Nevada Senate candidate against Harry Reid in 2010. And I used to say that her ideology was that of the email forward. back in the day, you'd get something that had been forwarded like 8 times, and it was some crazy nonsense about how, like, every president had celebrated D-Day until Obama or something. It was like, I got one of those emails, I remember, and being like, no, it's not true. I'm like, do you have any? Oh, and then I remember the response was, oh, whoops. So now I'm just talking about my pet peeves. But yeah,
Well,
your point
it's
about media
compounded.
literacy is absolutely correct.
Well, why don't you talk about your latest commentary in the Minnesota Reformer, where you talk about Ellison and his opponent? Is it Schutz or it's like my name without the L? Unfortunately,
Schutz.
Yeah, there's also a federal administrative law judge named Schultz, and there's also a federal judge in Minnesota called Schultz. So it's too many Germans. Yeah, I mean, this guy is comes out of the Federalist Society, the right wing judicial architecture. I mean, if there's a lack of intellectual infrastructure on the right, that's not true in the legal sphere. They have a very strong group of lawyers who work on politics and policy, and we can see it in the judiciary. I mean, it's the one area they really care about the most, the sort of intellectual right, and you can see what's happened. They've been successful. It's taken 50 years. They had a plan, they had a strategy, and they executed it. And he's right in that world. And now he's lined up with Trump. And like, people need to realize how important the job of Attorney General is. I mean, it's the chief legal officer of the state of Minnesota. It's the person who will defend Minnesota in this kind of barrage of legal assaults from the federal government. And so there's defense of Minnesota. There's also, we need to be on the legal attack against the Trump administration. So the idea of having like a DFL trifecta, for instance, which I think is quite possible, and a Republican attorney general is just kind of crazy. I mean, this is like cognitive dissonance. But also, it's like, if you like this Supreme Court and you like overturning Roe v. Wade and the immunity for the president for any official act, and you like the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, this is your guy. I mean, he comes out of that tradition. He's very much he's in that movement. And so Ellison has, he's a polarizing figure, and he's traditionally sort of carried up the rear of electorally. He's won the closest race is 18. He won pretty comfortably. Last time was really close. And I think he's, the voters who are sort of angry about DFL governance, I think that he may be scapegoated for the mistakes of Tim Walz, maybe. That's sort of what I fear personally. And so I hope that people start paying attention to this race.
well, he's getting a lot of attention and working with other states to litigate against the Trump administration. Ellison is. So hopefully that will help him with fundraising. But I mean, and more people I think now know who Keith Ellison is or who our Attorney General is. But I think in your commentary, did you say that the Republican Attorney General Association is actually raising money and trying to getting into elections and Democrats who hold AG positions across states?
Yes,
Okay.
and there's a guy named Leonard Leo who's going to become somewhat infamous as he's the co-chair of the board of the Federalist Society. Schutz is a member, and he's a huge fundraiser on these Republican legal issues. And so they're going to throw all this dark money into that race. They haven't won the Attorney General's race in more than a half a century. And it can be a springboard to other offices. It often is in others. It hasn't been here, but it can be in other states. It has been in other states. It could definitely be. It's a very high profile. And yeah, they're throwing a lot of money at it. And also what's interesting is that Schutz, he clearly is just like going to hide under a bed until election day. I laid out some questions. He knows he cannot answer questions because he can't be aligned with Trump in any way, because Trump is so deeply unpopular in Minnesota, and that's a quick ticket to defeat. And so they're going to hide him. He's not going to do any interviews. He won't respond to any questions. He did do an interview in the Star Tribune. It was a very sort of side by side story. I don't think they really got deep enough into his background. But that, that's the kind of campaign they're going to run.
Well, I encourage people to go read Coolican's commentaries. They're always good. I don't know, how long does it take you to write a column like that?
That one took, there was someone who were reporting, and when it's like, when I'm dealing with like when you're dealing with like the right wing legal machine, like you need to be precise. But like the previous week, I'd written about surveillance of these Minnesota, the labor unions and other and progressive groups, and like it was like, okay, this reminds me of the Church Committee, which is this 1970s era Senate committee about using intelligence agencies to surveil American citizens without warrants. And I went and read it, read chunks of it and wrote it in an hour. And, I put it out like a few hours after the news dropped. And so like, I like those the most because I feel like often when I'm most inspired, like it's, you when I write the fastest, often it turns out the best, paradoxically.
Well, it's good stuff. And I don't have any more questions. And I feel like we've taken a lot of your time and time away from your family. And you definitely need a vacation, if that even exists in your world. But we appreciate the Minnesota Reformer. We appreciate all that you do for our state and working with other states. So thank you so much, and really encourage our viewers to go check out the Minnesota Reformer and get their news the right way.
Thank you. Sign up for our newsletter. It's free. All of our site is free, no paywall, no ads. And if you have your own publication, feel free to republish.
All right. Well, again, I'll just endorse Jen's comments and say thank you so much, Patrick, for hopping on with us today. Very much appreciated.
This has been fun. Thank you.